Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Anne Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 37 of season 5. Sam and I had a recent discussion around OAuth applications and their risks. OAuth applications provide third-party services access to an organisation's data. Here are a few things we covered. What are OAuth apps? What are they typically used for? Why is it important to monitor them? And how can app governance help monitor and protect from OAuth app attacks?
We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how are you doing this week?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. It's the run-up to Ignite. I'm feeling, some buzz in the community around Ignite. I see lots of different people are going. It feels like it's going to be a popular event.
Yeah, definitely. And I've now got, I'm now proctoring a couple of the labs. So that's good.
Nice. What's the content of your labs that you're doing?
So the labs are around Defender for Cloud,
Nice.
securing your assets and things like that. So I think it's two labs, but twice, if that makes sense. There's one each day that I'm sort of proctoring. So yeah, that'd be good. So
Great. Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see because they're bringing the partner event alongside Ignite. Be really interesting to see because I think there's going to be a lot more commercial drive to be there. With the partner ecosystem, right?
Yeah, definitely. And there seems to be a lot of content, and that. So yeah, it's gonna be a good one, I think.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, I feel like it's slowly just creeping back to quotes normality, right?
100%. Ignite 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, really good. Anything else in the cybersecurity space we need to talk about? Any random things that have come up?
No, I don't think so. Work's been pretty busy, so it's been head down and cracking on with the work that we've got.
Anything I've been seeing on the, I'm going to still call it the Twitter sphere, is that I didn't know if you saw, but people are saying that there's been a gap in Sentinel logs. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I haven't seen anything around that. I don't know if there was some. I did read something about some potentially Microsoft losing some customer data.
Yeah, I think that's around the same thing. Yeah, I haven't seen like an official, post about it, but I've seen some people doing breakdowns of like their, I don't know, customers that they look after, things like, no actual customer information, but just looking at the statistics. And I believe the period is just after the CrowdStrike outage. I don't know whether those two things are connected in any way. I know Microsoft had some outage around that time in one region, didn't they? That overlapped the CrowdStrike outage. So yeah. I don't know if it's all just a follow on from that, but I haven't heard anything from this side of the pond, so to speak, on it. I just didn't know if you had tracked it at all.
No, I've not heard anyone complaining about it, even from like the MVP community.
Yeah,
I've not heard anyone saying around data being lost in Sentinel and things like that. But
yeah, no, okay, might just be just localized incident or or whatnot. But yeah, cool. What we learning about this week, Alan?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about OAuth apps and how the features within Defender Cloud apps, app governance can help sort of monitor and protect against potential attacks or data leakage from OAuth applications. I think it's a bit we haven't really covered. App governance side of thing used to be a paid add-on for MDA. And then I think a year, maybe 2 years ago now, that Microsoft sort of brought it in as a sort of included in some of the license SKUs now. So yeah, I think we should need to talk about it because OAuth apps are widely used everywhere, and yeah, there may be some on there that maybe need to be checked. As we've seen OAuth attacks where people consent to the apps and gain access to data. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, should we start from the sort of the beginning with what do you mean by an OAuth app, and what's the typical usage for them?
yeah, sure. So OAuth applications or consents and things like that really is a method for a service to authenticate with a identity provider to then gain access to certain resources within that service. In the context we'll probably use most of the time here is using Microsoft Entra as the identity provider, and then applications requesting access to Office 365 Microsoft Graph data. So requesting access to mail or to SharePoint, Outlook, etc. To perform a task that might also just be to authenticate. So to collect basic user information like their username, their name, things like that to populate the other side. So OAuth applications effectively perform that authentication, allows you to. It's slightly outside of sort of single sign-on. It kind of is and isn't, I guess, in some way. It's not using SAML 2 authentication at this point to sort of feedback. But in effect, when you use a third-party service or an app, an application, and you request, you want to connect it to your Office 365 data to maybe, I don't know, help you write. It might be a generative AI maybe that can help write an email if you're not using Copilot for security. No, Copilot for security, Copilot for 365, or it might be just to manage your emails, maybe to help auto tag things like that. There might be some form of that sort of integration. So that's kind of what they're mainly used is to help provide access to some of that data. Now within, and again, like this is kind of that sort of typical use, and beforehand, probably I don't know 2, 3, maybe 3 years ago. There was no true controls maybe within Entra. I think it's fair to say that users could consent to any application. So one might be to do authentication actually on an iPhone and the Apple Mail app. So to be able to get your email in there and authenticate, you had to do a consent to the app. Same thing with things like Samsung Mail, and then various other ones. So people would consent, allow access to their mail so they could use the apps, and it could be across anything. Just this prompt says we need access to to your services. It'd give you a list of what app data it might need. But probably from the typical user, they may not read that. Just go, yeah, accept. I need to, I want to do it, and then it sort of goes through. Probably maybe a year, 18 months ago, it kind of changed to being able to add, in effect, by default, blocking, that authorization, so that you had to go, an admin had to approve it at that point. So preventing, potential attacks then of malicious, OAuth apps, gaining access to data, because it would be in the what they in effect impersonates the user that's authenticating. You're delegating its access based on the user's access in effect. So they have to access the app itself to be able to then use that sort of access, but potentially data could then be accessed and then pulled out. And then I think there was a period of time when OAuth apps were being used quite a lot to in fact gain access to a 365 environment or to any SaaS application, any sort of data there to then pull data out, and it would be partially unseen, I guess, in some way at that time. But yeah, so that's generally what they use. They probably use for everything that you can think of. It's not something everyone will be using an OAuth application of some form for various applications and things like that. It's just working out then why, making sure they're monitored and removed, because that's probably one of the key things that's quite difficult is understanding their usage and which ones you can remove, what users are accessing them. It's quite hard to drill down into them because an organization might have 100, 200 of these OAuth applications, and then it's a task in itself to try and work out which ones should and shouldn't be used at that point.
Well, what's the default for a new tenant on that? Is it to allow users to consent to their own applications now?
I believe so, because you have to specify who the admins are for the auto consent side of things.
Yeah.
So I think even out of the box, an affected user can consent to their own SaaS application, or to their own OAuth apps and things like that. So it's can be quite dangerous if you didn't know to configure that other config.
Yeah, because I think most of the time, I say most of the time. No, not most of the time. A chunk of the time, the conversation usually goes down. Oh yeah, we turned that off like 3 months ago, or oh, I didn't even know people could do that. And I think it is quite a open default, if that makes sense. I know there's obviously a balance between, user security, security and usability, right? But in most organizations, we want to, keep people sort of on the straight and narrow, so to speak. But allowing people just to give access to their user profile at a minimum, or even like something like their mailbox, seems quite dangerous, really, nowadays, especially with the types of attacks we see, and sort of manipulation we see of users. Sort of getting somebody to consent to an application is probably as easy, or if maybe even easier, than phishing somebody for their credentials, right? And you bypass all of that at that point, don't you?
Yeah, and this isn't necessarily saying, I talked about malicious apps, things like that. This could be third-party services that are legitimately valid and well known and respected, within trusted sort of applications. But if they get compromised, then the bad actors that are there can then potentially jump into customers' data from there. So so it's just there's a lot of risk. That's all, and it's always going to be there. It's not it's not something to say you shouldn't use third-party applications, not at all. But it's just working around how you can reduce that risk.
Yeah, and our perimeter is ever changing, isn't it? And I think third-party SaaS applications, my gut is that is going to be more and more true risk there as we go on. I think the lucrative nature of breaching like a third-party application by a threat actor is probably more lucrative than actually hitting each individual organization, because a lot of these applications do get some sort of permission over a user's identity, if that makes sense, with these types of integrations. I think you mentioned mail apps is the big one, right? And unfortunately, when you use those third-party mail apps, you lose out on a lot of the Microsoft functionality that you can get from Outlook, right, on mobile especially. So yeah, I think it's definitely important to, I assume that's essentially the, I don't know, defining criteria of Defender for Cloud Apps really is understanding that usage and making good positive change in your organization to make it more secure, right? So it's all about knowledge, I suppose. I think you've probably talked to this, but are there any other key areas that you think it's of why it's important to monitor OAuth applications? I think we've we've touched on that a little bit already.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's understanding what data is maybe leaving your organization through those OAuth applications, because some of it might be light touch, slow level, but if you're starting to see like heavy gigs of data going at us, an OAuth application, that might raise concern. And traditionally or previously, I guess you'd never be able to see that data. It'd be very hard to understand what data was leaving through the OAuth applications. Not quite. I think there'd be ways around it, but it was never really sort of centralized, if that makes sense. It was always quite hard, and monitoring them also to see whether they've got they're using all their permissions. We're looking at permissions creep in some form. It says it needs all this permission, but actually 99% of the time it only needs X permission kind of thing. So you can then see if they're over looking for over provisioned applications. That's kind of the key areas, I think, is making sure, one, it's being used, and if it's not, then you can shut it down, because that's a crack in the armor, isn't it? It's an opening in the armor, whether you are or aren't using it anymore. Understanding what information's leaving, or how much data or what information is leaving via that OAuth application, and then what permissions it has, and what risks are involved in them having those apps. Because, like I said, a user potentially wouldn't understand at the time of consenting themselves what it means that it can send email on behalf of you. Because there might be apps to do that for you. There are apps that are probably legitimately used to send email as on behalf of you. I mean, I guess kind of like the the Apple Mail and things like that potentially. But those being compromised means that they can just use your mail to spam out. Potentially. So it's definitely a lot of risk to be monitored there.
Okay. Could you just give us an overview of Defender for Cloud Apps and on what it's aiming to achieve?
Yeah, sure. So Defender for Cloud Apps has been around for quite some time now. It used to be called Cloud App Security before its grand rename into the Defender world. But originally it's kind of started off as a CASB solution. So monitoring activity within Office 365, Azure, and other SaaS applications, and be able to create alerts and in effect on user activity, unusual activity within those SaaS applications. It's kind of evolved a lot more now to kind of show those, bring those identities from those SaaS applications into the Defender XDR portal, so you can see how they all sort of map together. But also now you've got this part, kind of what used to be sort of a paid service on top of Defender for Cloud Apps called App Governance, which primarily looks at in effect sort of the OAuth application side of things, as well as bringing in what they call SSPM, which is SaaS Security Posture Management. So in effect, giving you when you've got some SaaS apps that have supported integrated, like Salesforce is one of them, and I think Google is as well, Google Workspace. It allows you to see the configuration and gives you best practice in effect, or recommended config to harden that environment. Maybe it's to enforce MFA for the non-SaaS, non-SAML, identities, or various other things that are in there. In effect, with those connectors there, it can then bring in the OAuth apps from those other SaaS services as well. So it's been around for quite some time. The other part as well, I suppose, I've probably forgotten to mention, is that it can do some DLP, data loss prevention, sort of complementing the stuff that Purview does. It's probably like a version 1, actually, probably fair to say, from the DLP side of things. and it can sort of do session control to help lock down access from the browser, where we can download, upload, things like that, or do certain actions in SaaS applications where supported from a browser session in effect. So you can prevent download, upload if it's on an unmanaged device, that kind of thing. So it's definitely a lot in the sort of tool set. It's definitely around cloud apps. So yeah, it's probably a high level view of that.
Okay, yeah. Can we dive into app governance and what it's aiming to achieve in Defender for Cloud Apps?
Yeah, so app governance has kind of been brought in as a feature for Defender for Cloud Apps. Is kind of to sort of provide security and policy management or capability around OAuth enabled apps registered. Like we said, in Entra ID, Google and Salesforce is kind of the key ones at the moment, with other ones in coming in private previews, things like that. The idea of it is to bring visibility to show you all that information I kind of talked about previously, where it was quite difficult to see all that data in one place. So that makes sense. It's kind of aggregating all that data to show you it, so you can make decisions around these OAuth applications. Potentially also brings in some remediation, so revoking permissions and revoking access, things like that, as well as governing how these apps are being used when they were last used, whether they're sharing whether they've hit sensitive information, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the key areas. There are policies in there to do detections around risky apps and apps that maybe don't comply with some of the requirements you have, and yeah, so it's it's a very good portal to get that information, those insights.
Cool. Can we dive into some of those insights and alerts that you can get in app governance?
Yeah, sure. So there is an overview page that you see pretty much sort of high level stats around this, and it's once you sort of launch it, it does sort of show you quite quickly potential, like, I suppose, issues or things that you definitely need to look at. Some of those insights kind of sort of dive into sort of high privileged apps, where they've got not necessarily God mode to services, but maybe we've got some very high privileges in there. Overprivileged apps. So, like I said, ones that you've got permissions that they're never using now. So maybe they need decreasing. You got some stats around high usage, again showing data leaving the organization. You've got things like top consented users who have top consented users, priority accounts who have data that's for specific app access, and OAuth applications that access sensitive or regular content on SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange Online, and Teams. So I think that's quite important, is the sensitive sort of data side of things. So, having visibility of where you're using sensitive labels within your data in SharePoint, OneDrive, SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, and Teams. We'll get all those right. There needs to be an acronym. I suppose it's Office 365, really, isn't it, at that point? But thinking about it,
I know what you mean.
but yeah, having your sensitive information types on there, you can then identify applications maybe hitting a specific label that you've set. So maybe you've got some highly confidential data that you shouldn't see a SaaS application accessing. So at least you can see where that data might be going. So I think that's quite key. Again, this is really just showing you that visibility. When you see those SaaS or those OAuth apps, you can click on them, and in effect you can dive into then which users are using it, who last used it, how much data is going through that application, and if it touched any sensitive information. that it was accessing. Previously, you wouldn't be able to do that quite very easily without looking at Entra logs and maybe Office 365 logs to kind of correlate that all together. Yes, potentially you could do that through, I guess, Sentinel side of things, but you'd have to build the queries, things like that, to sort of do that checking. In effect, this portal is doing it for you. And yeah, in effect, some of those detections are being created. And there is, so you can build these detections to look for highly privileged apps over privileged sort of apps as well. There's various other ones, sort of applications. They know new app consented with high privileges, so you can see when new ones are being created. Bear in mind with that one though that if you've got admin consent enabled, then they shouldn't appear that often, or you would definitely know about them because you would have been doing the due diligence on the app as you consent to it. But one thing probably to bring in is, as we all love the wording, but there is machine learning built in to in effect check some of the usage of these applications and detect anomalies basically within their usage. There, so there's definitely a lot of stuff happening in the background as well as giving you that visibility there.
Okay, yeah. So I think like you said, I suppose you probably do have access to a lot of the raw data, but you would have to define what it is that you want to look at, build your detections and how you want to be alerted and things like that. I suppose this wraps it all up into one package for you. And if you are an organization that is lucky enough to be licensed for it, I suppose you do have access to it. So it's just extra enriched information that you can get access to, right? And sort of delivered on a plate, really.
Yeah, and this is, I guess, is some of the not necessarily complaints, but the concerns from customers that we've been sort of working with, is that they've got all they like you said, Sam, earlier, they've said they've turned on the app, the admin consent part 3 months ago, but it's been running wild in air quotes for last 2-3 years, etc., and they've now got 200-300 apps that they don't know who's using what easily. This tool kind of helps with that because it gives you all the data there and then. You can decide what you do with it, and at least then you've got that sort of view. I think when we were doing this and I showed a customer it, they in effect sort of said, this is great, but there's so much information and so much stuff in here that I'm gonna have to employ someone else to take a look at this, even though they probably need to do that anyway. But it's a key part to making sure they're secure, making sure that the data's not leaving.
Yeah, and there is a constant struggle around focus and resource in organizations, isn't there? And what is priority, what is not priority, because they're trying to manage as much risk as they possibly can, right? With the limited resources, that is people and budgets that they've got, right? So I think personally, any tool that can make that easier for organizations is going to help its use, even if you have to pay for that, right? I don't want people to have to pay for things, and I suppose you do have a way to sort of DIY it yourself, if you've got the time and the patience and the knowledge to look at these things. So yeah, and a lot of the time you're completely right. People will be like, this is way too much information, but it's like, no, this is something that you do need to look at. It is important, and it's maybe something that's missed, especially if you can't see it, right? Because there's a lot of edge cases in security where a config is now changed and been right sized correctly, but still there's activity happening sort of invisibly to the organization, right? So if they do at least have knowledge of it, then they can make a justification, a business case that it is monitored and managed going forward, right?
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit it on nail on the head there. It's kind of, even if you just use it for discovery. You're removing a blind spot again.
Yeah.
That's not really ever really thought about.
Yeah. And what about, we've talked about logging and sort of insights. What about remediation? Can it help us actually fix any of these problems that it discovers? I don't mean to say that in a bad way, but it kind of sounded like that.
Yeah, so in effect, within the alerts and things like that, you can actually get it to. So off the top of my head, I don't know if it can automatically remediate. I don't know if it's something that you've got to go in and say, I want to sort something out with it. But you can go in there manually, in effect, into an alert, where it's detected something, or any of the application pages, and in effect revoke the permissions, or reduce the permissions for that SaaS application. So if it's a word, unconsent from some of the permissions that it needs, or completely revoke all permissions to it, and even potentially, I guess if you still had it open, potentially also ban that OAuth application. So even if someone does consent to it, if you didn't add admin consent, you can potentially ban that application itself. And it's got integrations into also Salesforce and the Google Workspace, because in effect they use OAuth apps to talk to other applications and services they have. Well, I guess Google Workspace is equivalent to Office 365, so in effect, access to mail, things like that. Salesforce, I guess, will be probably data and things, customer data, things like that. So again, you can see those ones. Ban the app, so it can never access it. Revoke access automatically on the app if someone does consent to it, and in effect notify users that that app has been banned as well if you want to. So I think that's kind of the key parts of it. I don't know if there's an API. There is some API access to the service, I think, or it might be coming as it's kind of merging more into the Defender XDR portal. So maybe some ways to automate maybe that revoking based on criteria, maybe within a Sentinel alert. Definitely be an interesting one to look at, actually, thinking about it. So yeah, that's I mean, really the only remediation for this is to revoke access or to reduce access from this side of things. So yeah.
Okay, cool. And I think we've touched on it, but can we just talk about how much it costs and how it's licensed?
So I don't know how much it costs, because it's part of Defender for Cloud Apps now in effect. But mainly, it's still been shown as app governance being a separate sort of application. But when you buy Microsoft 365 E3, Microsoft 365 E5 security add-on or E5, in effect you get that service. But I assume that you get it if you buy a Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps license as well, so sort of get that. But you do have to sort of cover the whole organization, because you're looking at all of the user activity kind of thing. So it's not like you can sort of buy a single license and gain the access. So, but yeah. But yeah, it is good, and it does, like I said, it does show you, which users are using it as well quite easily. I think that's the hardest part, because I think previously either, you had to run PowerShell to maybe get all the information. I don't think you could get it all, not easily, or you had to click through every app. At which point, you give up with it. So yeah, but yeah, it's licensed. Going back to licensing, yes, it's part of the E5 security add-on, and also with it's meant to be around with the Defender for Cloud Apps license as its sort of lowest SKU that you could possibly get for it.
Cool, thanks, Alan. Anything else you want to cover on this one?
No, I think that's it. I think there's quite a lot. I don't know how long we've been talking for. Well, quite some time. Um, it's it seems like a small area, but it is. Once you dive into it, it's one of those. This is great sort of moment, loads of information, but then it's also, there's a lot of work to maybe get on top of it initially, I think. But I think that's right in the sense that it's a blind spot that now you've uncovered, the truths behind the OAuth apps. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much, Alan.
Cool. What's our next episode?
Our next episode is the news for October. We're going to be taking a little break before the news, just because Alan's off on his holidays. I'll go with that. So we'll be returning back with another episode in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple or Spotify. This really helps us reach out to more people like yourselves. If you do have any specific feedback or suggestions, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thanks ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.